Welcome to Health and Wellness with Coach A.T. Moore. Today we have a very special guest, Miss Sierra Hillsman. Good afternoon, Sierra. How are you?
I'm great. How are you, A.T.? Thank you so much for creating space for us to have this conversation. I'm truly excited.
Thank you for agreeing to come on. Now, you are currently in Atlanta.
Yes.
Really excited about this conversation is because it's one of the first times we kind of get an example of how the mental health profession can put you in different career spaces. I want to kind of go through the receipts or your credentials because you have a lot of them. So you can kind of explain to the audience what some of these initials mean. So when they are looking for a professional, they'll kind of know what to look for as far as credentials and licensure. So you are you have a master's in education, you have an LPC, NCC, a CAMS 2, and a CCTP. So let's start with the master's in education.
Yes, so I graduated from the University of West Georgia in Carrollton, Georgia. And for the clinical mental health counseling program, their credentials is Master's of Education. Yes, LPC stands for a licensed professional counselor. And so a number of different states have different credentialing. So for example, the state of Florida has licensed mental health counselor. Then in the state of Maryland, you have licensed clinical professional counselor. It really just depends on what state you happen to live in. And so because I've received my license in the state of Georgia, licensed professional counselor.
Okay. And then NCC.
Yes, National Certified Counselor. That's through our credentialing board, NBCC, which is the National Board of Certified Counselors.
Gotcha. And then CAMS 2.
Yes, I'm also a certified anger management specialist, level 2.
Okay. And then the last one, CCTP.
Yes, so that certification is Certified Clinical Trauma Professional. So a lot of what I work with, or a lot of clients that I work with, have experience with trauma, severe trauma, whether it's big T or little t, which we'll probably get into a little bit later. Yeah. But yeah, so I'm very trauma informed. I like to focus on how we can unpack those experiences that presented as being life-threatening or life-altering for individuals.
Y'all can see that she's qualified. Now, what I love about Sierra's contribution to the health space is that normally when we have people on, we are talking about mental professionals that have their own private practice. Sierra has something a little bit different. LegacySpeaks.com is her consulting firm. So if you can let us know the meaning behind your name and maybe the difference between a private practice and a consulting firm.
Absolutely. So the reason why I named my business Legacy Speaks is because I'm very enamored on leaving a legacy. I remember Oprah had mentioned a conversation that she had with Dr. Maya Angelou, and in that conversation they were talking about legacy isn't about what you essentially leave. It's like how you make people feel. It's the impact that you have on this planet. And that's what I really root myself in. How can I continue to be of service to other people? And that's why mental health is so important to me, because it only takes one person to impact a community. Oftentimes we think a lot about generational wealth, but it's important for us to consider generational health. And that includes mind, body, soul, spirit.
What is the difference between someone having a private practice and a consulting firm? Because when I go, first of all, your website is one of the most thorough websites that I've ever seen. I was looking at it and I was telling my husband, this is one of the best websites that I've ever seen. You have the consulting piece where it kind of shows your one-on-one strategy sessions, your speaking engagements, your group coaching, and your business consulting. But then you have the component of the mental health services that you offer as well. And it's just very concise. I love your website. Y'all go check it out if you're wondering, like, what is she talking about? Because it kind of gives you a holistic view of all that she offers.
Thank you so much for that feedback. I greatly appreciate it. Yeah, so individuals who have private practices, they typically really truly focus on the mental health component. Even though I am a contracted mental health therapist, I work in multiple settings. So the agency setting currently, as well as serving as a contractor for a private practice here in Atlanta. I just really wanted to make sure that Legacy Speaks focused on training and consulting and providing information to individuals. So a little bit of a backstory with Legacy Speaks. I started the business while I was in grad school, and I was getting all of this information. I was just like, this cannot wait. I really want to make sure that people of color, specifically Black communities, had access to this, because I understand that like all of us need assistance with our mental wellness goals. And so obviously not everybody's going to go pursue a master's in social work or a master's in clinical counseling or whatever the case may be. But we live in an information age, and I want to make sure that this was readily accessible. So I started off with my YouTube channel, transitions to lunch and learn trainings and things of that nature, and then offered my consulting opportunities to make sure that businesses had those as well. And I saw this becoming more prevalent when the pandemic hit, because a lot of individuals were struggling with creating that transition between working in the office and working from home. What I noticed was a lot of people have a tendency of staying at work for long hours due to their role demands, or maybe staying at work longer because they want to stay away from the stressors at home. On the flip side, a lot of people thoroughly enjoy being home. That's their safe place, and they're bringing work into the home, and that just disrupts their overall environmental wellness. And so whether you're on either or of the spectrums, I found that a lot of people were struggling during that time. Yes, it was very convenient to not have to get up, get dressed, get in your car, but a lot of your triggers are in the same space.
Yeah.
And so just helping a lot of businesses with that transition on how to help their employees, as well as their middle managers or their vice presidents, navigate this transition. And then obviously that as the pandemic has begun to settle in, my consulting services have been able to expand towards like overall company wellness as a whole, because a lot of individuals have struggled to get back into the office because they appreciated the way that they've been able to focus on their wellness on their own. So helping individuals, or at least companies and businesses, create that space for their employees to feel heard, seen, to have their experiences solidified. Yes, you have employee assistance programs, but what are you actually doing on a department level?
As I'm listening to you speak, the word boundaries kept coming up. Boundaries. So how often did you have to introduce or reintroduce or establish or let companies or businesses or CEOs know about the importance of establishing boundaries, or reinventing or restructuring boundaries to kind of assist in this transition?
Very much so. So not only establishing boundaries, but also communicating those boundaries and implementing those boundaries. I think the issue isn't about like establishing boundaries. The struggle is maintaining the actual boundaries.
Yeah.
When oftentimes all of us have smartphones, your cell phone is always pinging off the hook because you're getting emails from every little thing, or you have an invitation for a conference call, or you have some new project that you just got put on without your knowledge, things of that nature, or it really just depends on the industry. But there were just so many different dynamics. So like we talked about, communication, implementation of boundaries, as well as developing that work-life harmony. Also, some things is like introducing people to resources, because like I mentioned, yes, you have your employee assistance program, but especially as Black employees, we need to make sure that we equip those individuals with the resources that are culturally competent or culturally sensitive.
Mental health is now a buzzword, but a lot of people do not realize that their companies do offer free counseling services. It just amazes me how many people are not aware of that. I don't think it's something that is talked about a lot as they're doing their hiring. It's that might be missed, because I was talking to a friend of mine about they were thinking about getting some assistance in the area they were struggling in, and when I mentioned, your company has this, I didn't know. I said, yeah, it's a resource that your company provides.
Yeah, very much so. And I also would like to add a caveat. Not only do people not know that they exist, but there are times where individuals don't feel safe enough to utilize those resources.
Yeah, absolutely.
So they're really concerned about how much of their anonymity is respected in those spaces.
Yeah, and they should be concerned about that, because sometimes it's not. sometimes it's not. So you specialize in a lot, but I want to just go through a couple of them, but I really want to pay more attention to the last one I'm going to mention. You are a certified clinical trauma professional. You work with anger management, assertiveness training, challenging irrational beliefs, and substance, emotional, and psychological trauma abuse. Now, for those of y'all that are listening, I'm just going to ask her to kind of give a brief summary or example of someone that would be in need of a trauma professional or anger management, just in case you think that it doesn't apply to you. She might explain something that might make you think, I never thought about it that way. So let's start with trauma professional, and I do want to hit on big T and little t.
Yeah, very much so. So when we're talking about big T trauma, that looks like your physical, sexual, emotional abuse. It could also include those dynamics in which you felt like you were truly impacted. Like we talked about, trauma is more of like whether you perceive whether or not your life is being threatened. When you feel like overall you're struggling because of those major issues at hand. So when we think about like PTSD, oftentimes people think about like veterans in combat and things of that nature, but we also can relate it to the communities that we might have lived in. So whether it's not witnessing somebody being killed right in front of you, or hearing gunshots in the middle of the night, or being robbed at gunpoint, those are examples of big T related trauma. Little T related trauma looks like whether it be like car accidents, or maybe even somebody yelling at you, or maybe even somebody slamming on the brakes right in front of you. Like there's so many different components to like trauma.
Anger management.
Anyone who might struggle with the issue of anger can receive anger management training. What I often find is like individuals who deal with like impulsivity, individuals who find themselves going from 0 to 100, individuals who are often like harming themselves or other people when they become overwhelmed by the emotion of anger. And the interesting thing about anger is that yes, it's a standalone emotion. However, when we think about anger, we can also look at it as a secondary emotion as well. There are so many different other emotions that come up.
Yeah.
For individuals, whether it's feeling hurt, disrespected, feeling overwhelmed, maybe saddened, betrayal, things of that nature. So there are so many different things. So teaching individuals how to unpack that anger, unpack what has led to the anger. And also what I find is like I pair anger management with individuals who might have substance use and abuse disorders as well, because with the substances, depending on what you're utilizing, you're numbing your emotions. You're not really in tune with what you're experiencing. And so taking the time to encourage individuals to slow down and think clearly, or allow themselves to fully rest in their emotions so that they can gain a better understanding of what's going on.
Assertiveness training.
Yeah, so assertiveness training is learning to advocate for oneself. So that includes setting boundaries, effectively communicating how you feel, finding your voice. That way you can advocate for yourself, whether it be in relationships or maybe even relationship dynamics. Especially with the consulting work that I do, individuals or employees are still trying to figure out how to communicate their needs, how to effectively express like, yo, this is really stressing me out, but in a professional way, of course.
Right. Yeah.
So encouraging people to stand up for themselves. And yes, it's important for us to work on a team related basis, but those teams are made up of individual members. And so if you don't take care of the I, then the we falls to the wayside. So encouraging people to develop those skills. And
then you have challenging irrational beliefs. And I like that you use irrational, because I always see that as limiting beliefs. So was irrational an intentional placement for that?
Yeah, so when I think about irrational, I always refer to those cognitive distortions. There are about 15 cognitive distortions out there, whether it's like polarized thinking, minimizing, maybe only looking at the good in a situation and forgetting that there are other things to consider. And so taking some time to, and I always use this like catch it, check it, change it, catch the thought, check the validity of that thought, check the relevancy of the thought. and then change it to something that's more positive or solution focused. And the reason why I say positive and or solution focused is because a lot of times people have a tendency of utilizing toxic positivity, where they're completely disregarding the full picture, and it's only like it's optimism on overdrive. Yes, you want to be hopeful, but you don't want to be delusional, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you don't want to deny reality. Yeah, absolutely.
Very much so. Making sure that you're fully present in your thoughts, and also giving yourself the opportunity to be solution focused. Like, what is next steps? What do we do from here now that we've gathered this information?
One I really want to talk a little bit more about is you specialize in life transitions. Can you explain more what that is?
Yes. So when I think about life transitions, it's literally that, helping an individual go from one place in their life to the next. And there are so many different life transitions. So a teenager going from high school to college, a woman going from being single to being married, a business owner going from having this amazing business to it having to close that business. So whatever transition you find yourself in, helping that individual to honor their previous experience, honor where they're currently at, and to prepare for what's next. Or if they are in their next, helping them to get acclimated to this next. And when we're even talking about the concept of acclimation, just making sure that you claim time to be able to grieve what you have lost. I think a lot of people forget that when we're moving into our next season, or when we are moving on to our next, there's a little bit of grief that we experience, because as we're gaining something new, we're also losing something as well.
Absolutely. And I think that was what a lot of people experienced during the pandemic, because, you know, there was a lot of disruption. And even with students and kids, you know, they are used to having a very structured schedule, and they lost that. And with that loss comes a lot of uncertainty. And so parents not knowing, teachers not knowing how they were going to distribute lessons. And so when we look at grief, sometimes we only look at the loss of an individual, a loved one, but it can also be the loss of structure, the loss of certainty, the loss of resources, the loss of friends, the loss of community. And that can cause a lot of anxiety, depression, and stillness, where you just don't, you become incapable of moving forward because you get stuck in the present.
Very much so. Or not only just getting stuck in the present, getting stuck in regret, getting stuck in self-blame, getting stuck in probably blaming other people or circumstances, getting stuck in religiosity. There's just so many like places of stuck that keeps us from being able to transition into what's next.
You graduated from the University of South Florida, double majoring in communication sciences and disorders and psychology. And then you didn't hit the pause. 2 years later, you went and got your master's of education in clinical mental health from, like you said earlier, the University of West Georgia. But on your website, you talked about a postgraduate crisis. Can you explain what that is? And I'm assuming that's what moved you to Atlanta?
Yeah. So when you say I didn't take a pause, I was like, yes, I actually did take a pause.
2 years later, you took a pause, and then 2 years later, you went back into the education field to get your master's in education.
I wasn't supposed to be in the mental health field. I went to school originally to become a speech language pathologist for deaf children.
Wow.
So I graduated from the University of South Florida with double major in communication sciences and disorders and psychology, and a minor in American Sign Language. But around the time that I graduated, they were still on that whole, every job that I applied to, we're not going to hire you because you don't have the experience. And it's just kind of like, well, I need the experience to get, like, so what do I do here? And so I took a year off to figure out what I needed to do. And I was having a deep conversation with my friend, because I'm really big on what I now know to be existentialism. Like, what is my purpose? Is this what I want to do? Maybe this is God's way of sitting me down to reevaluate or redirect me in a new way. And so I'm like, well, what do I want to try now that I'm in this waiting period? And I wanted to get into the entertainment industry, but on the back end, I wanted to be able to manage amazing talent, or at least get into the public relations field in some way, shape, form, or fashion. Mind you, my undergraduate degree had nothing to do with entertainment, had nothing to do with public relations. I just have the gift of writing. And so I took a leap of faith, quit my job, and moved to Atlanta. And from there, I was just really like hustling and grinding and networking and meeting new people, volunteering, making connections. I volunteered, did some like contract work on the side just to kind of keep afloat. Then after that, I was able to get a paid internship, which led to another paid internship, which led to like a full-time job. And in the midst of experiencing all of that, I still did not have a sense of fulfillment. I was also going through like some family related concerns. There were a number of family members that had mental health concerns, dealing with like suicidality, homicidality, depression. My uncle was dying from cancer at the time, so obviously that was like very detrimental to like my family's well-being. And I remember growing up in a household that lived from paycheck to paycheck. And I knew for a fact that I wasn't the only one having that experience. I knew for a fact that if my family struggled to even go to like the physical doctor, how are they even supposed to know how to tend to their mental health, right? And so I just wanted to figure out, how can I help not only save my family, but save other people that were like me.
Well, I hope you are enjoying this conversation with Sierra Hillsman. I know I am. I'm learning a lot, and we've just scratched the surface. Tomorrow, she's going to continue to share her story on how she entered into the mental health space. So make sure you tune back in for part 2. This is Health and Wellness with Coach